And can you imagine how offensive that feels?
How many people from your community fail to speak English?
How many people?
You claim that Muslims living in the UK don't share British values. How
No,
would you...
I didn't say that. You're the father of the policy that produced this.
No.
That EU migrants leave.
That is absolute rubbish.
Why should British taxpayers pay for new sewers in Budapest, for a new underground system in Warsaw, when our own public services are crumbling in London?
Welcome back to Rattlesnake TV, guys. There has been some big news out of England this week, with the leader of the Reform Party and the head of the Brexit movement, Nigel Farage, set to run in the next election. And this election will take place on the 4th of July. Shoutouts to my American friends. Now, since announcing, Nigel has already copped a milkshake to the face from an OnlyFans model, who obviously did this as an attention whorish publicity stunt, so we won't be showing or naming her. But anyways, this is definitely going to shake things up because Nigel Farage is a very popular and a very effective candidate who is bound to appeal to the millions of Brits who feel like they've been let down by the Conservative Party and in smaller parts by the Labour Party. You see, the number one issue on the minds of Brits in this coming election cycle is the immigration problem. They want the borders closed, they want to stop the boats from coming, and they want to try and get their country back. And the Conservative Party, under Rishi Sunak and his predecessors, have been absolutely useless on this. And if you think that's bad, imagine what Labour will do. So, the two candidates, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, are essentially dumb and dumber in this situation, and the people are seeing through it. In this video, we're going to watch Nigel Farage in multiple different interviews getting challenged, and in a heated way, on his views on immigration and particularly Islamic immigration to the UK. And take note that this debate was a few weeks ago, so it was a little bit before he announced that he was actually running. Let's get into it.
The army has shrunk from 100,000 to 75,000 in 14 years of conservatism. And most interestingly, we have a growing number of young people in this country who do not subscribe to British values, in fact, loathe much of what we stand for. So what do you do?
Who are we talking about there?
Oh, I think we see them on the streets of London every Saturday.
What do they look like? Oh, we're talking about...
What do they look like?
Are we talking about Muslims here?
We are. And I'm afraid I found some of the recent surveys saying that 46% of British Muslims support Hamas, support a terrorist organisation that is prescribed in this country. So we've been, you know, and what's interesting is that this Prime Minister, is building up far more of that population than anybody before in history.
Well, this is very interesting, and we don't have that survey in front of us, but let's just unpick what you've just said. Are you sure you want to make the blanket accusation that you've just made that Muslims are somehow less patriotic than other British people? Because those people on those demonstrations are British.
Did you watch the recent elections that took place up and down the country?
We don't know that, and we don't know they support Hamas. Would you like to revisit what you said at all?
Let's be clear. There is a growing population of people in this country, a lot of them very young, who have recently been voting for and electing candidates, right, up and down the country, in inner cities, who stand for a set of values that are completely, not only don't subscribe to our values, but in many cases are totally against our values. And the marches, there are some on those marches. Equally, there are lots of upper middle class girls called Jocasta on those marches as well, and I understand that. But we have to face the fact, and at some point, by 2029, the Labour Party will have to face the fact that they started a policy of irresponsible, open-door immigration, but nobody in history has allowed more people in who are potentially going to fight against British values than Mr. Sunak. And if you look at those figures last week, if you look at the sheer numbers that were coming in last week, you really have to ask yourself some questions.
Well, is this the thrust of the Reform campaign, that actually immigration means that our values are threatened, and particularly we are unhappy about Muslims? Because that is a pretty incendiary proposition.
We have never before seen anything like this. You think about West Indian immigration into Britain, the post-World War II.
I think of very little else.
West Indian immigration into Britain post-World War II. You know, there were a lot of shared things there. Shared history, shared culture, shared religion in many cases. Most families that came could say one of their family had served with British forces in World War I, World War II, love of cricket. You know, the list goes on, but there were commonalities. And, you know, as you know with your previous job, the key to immigration is integration. If you get integration, it works. What we've done is, and this works on several levels. We've done...
I'm going to stop you there, and I'm going to say two things.
Well, here's the difference.
No, I'm going to tell you something about the difference. First of all, you're right, I come from that stock. But let us remember that my stock, my ancestors, for the best part of 700 or 800 years, were Muslims until they were forcibly converted to Christians by slave owners. So when you talk about Muslims as hostile to British values, I've got to say, I don't really... Let me finish what I'm going to say. I don't really see I don't really see how you arrive at that conclusion. And secondly, trying to say to me, you know, actually, you guys are not really like these other guys. I mean, you and I have known each other a long time. Can you imagine how offensive that is to a British Muslim? Let me ask you to put yourself in the shoes of a British Muslim, and can you imagine how offensive that feels?
How many people from your community fail to speak English?
How many people?
From the West Indian community don't speak English.
We all speak English, but actually so do most Indian Muslims, so do pretty much all Pakistani Muslims in this country.
I can take you to streets in Oldham where virtually no one speaks English.
I've been there too. But honestly, come on.
The point I'm making is this.
Seriously.
I am not here to attack the religion of Islam, but I am here...
Well, you've just been doing it for 3 minutes.
No, I haven't. I'm telling you the alarming figures that have been coming out of these recent polls, particularly in the wake of what has happened on October the 7th and in Gaza, and we have a real problem here. We want...
All right.
I mean, firstly, numbers on immigration need to be sensible, otherwise everyone's quality of life gets diminished. Diminished in every way. Diminished because you can't get a GP appointment. Diminished because you can't travel anywhere without traffic jams. Diminished because getting on a housing ladder is impossible, because we now need to build one new dwelling every 2 minutes.
I want to get on to...
And that's apart from...
I want to get on to politics, but I just want to be absolutely clear, and I want to give you the opportunity to be clear, because everything you've just said suggests that the Reform platform for this election is every problem you face is down to immigrants, and in particular to Muslims. Is that really what you're saying?
No, actually, most people aren't yet affected by this, because the areas with anti-British values tend to be geographically, at the moment, very tightly concentrated. But they do pose a problem.
But you're not resiling from blaming that community.
I'm blaming elements of that community. I'm not blaming them, I'm stating a fact. All I'm doing is stating a fact. No one else dares tell the truth about this. On the broader question, the biggest single problem this country faces is the population explosion. And it will not be debated in this election. Why? Because Labour started it and the Tories accelerated it. And that has led to problems on a scale that are unimaginable.
Okay, I want to debate that. And
Can anybody in the comments please explain to me how it is at all controversial to say that Muslim immigrant Brits are going to be less patriotic than native Brits? Perhaps there is a very obvious piece to the puzzle that I'm missing here. England is a Christian country, for example, so there's one glaring difference. And England is also a white European country with a long history of empire. It's actually, unlike what the Libs will tell you, a pretty amazing and comprehensive culture. And Nigel has been getting a lot of pushback on these comments since. So check out this clip.
Good morning, Mr. Farage. Thanks for your time.
Good morning.
OK, let's just start with some facts. Just bear with me here a second. We've examined one of the biggest polls that we could find that's been done on this. It was by Ipsos Mori. They analysed a shed load of polls that have been done on British Muslims in recent years, and they found absolutely conclusively that Muslims in the UK, living here in the UK, attach more importance on being British than do the general population. 85% feel that they truly belong to Britain. 55% say that their national identity as British is very important to them, and that compares to 44% of the general population. So I'm bound to ask, what on earth were you talking about there?
All right, should we get some context first? What I said was a growing number of young people do not subscribe to British values. In fact, despise, in many ways, British values. And what I was talking about, and by the way, every one of your viewers would have seen just a few weeks ago the local elections where in parts of our inner cities we saw sectarian politics, people voting purely on religious lines, councillors getting elected in Leeds and Burnley and elsewhere screaming Allahu Akbar, or things like we're coming to get you. Now, that, I think, was very, very disquieting. The most recent polling on this was done by JL Partners, a very reputable company. And this is what it showed, and this is what I'm worried about. It showed that 23% of 18 to 24-year-old young Muslims living in Britain think that jihad is a good thing. Now, that, of course, is not a British value in any way at all, and that's a very, very disturbing trend. It's particularly prevalent amongst the young. We have a problem, and just to say it's Islamophobic or it's this or it's that is to ignore the fact we have a very real problem.
Guys, just before we get on with the rest of the debate, if you don't mind chucking a like on this video and showing your support, that would be fantastic. And also, if you get value from this channel, if you like what I do here, don't hesitate to subscribe. Back to it.
When you say things like, you know, you claim that Muslims living in the UK don't share British values, how would you...
No, I didn't say that. No, I'm sorry. No. I'm not having this. I am not saying Muslims living in the UK don't share British values.
You said a growing number of young people in this country who do not subscribe to British values, and you then went on to explain that, yes, they were 46...
Well, thank you.
Then you were talking about the British Muslims.
So hang on. I'm talking about a minority, but a growing minority, and predominantly very young people in the British Muslim community are turning their backs on all the values and the tolerances that we believe in.
So my question to you was about British values. What are you summing up as British values when you talk about this?
Well, I don't think excluding women from public life and debate is very British, do you? It's very interesting. I mean, we saw Angela Rayner yesterday virtually begging her local Muslim community to vote for her. Not a single woman in the room. Look at the celebrations that we saw after the local election successes for Greens, Independents, etc. in the local elections. You'll find it very difficult to find a single woman there. Look at attitudes towards homosexuality. You know, we are a country that is very relaxed and tolerant about the issue in every way. You find large sections of that community have different views.
You often hear this in this debate. It's like, well, what is British culture? What is this British culture that you guys speak of? And then people will say things like democracy, and people will say things like women being in politics, and people will say things like homosexuality being celebrated. That's British culture. No, that's not British culture. That's called liberalism. And that is not synonymous with the identity of Britain. That's just an ideology that has taken hold of Britain. When I think of British values and British identity and what there is to fight for, I think of things like the monarchy, Queen Elizabeth as the ultimate stoic matriarch figure of grace and dedication, chivalry and gentlemanly behaviour, being polite and courteous, tea and scones. You go to Britain and it's very much like that with the older people still. I think intellectualism, Oxford, Cambridge, and such incredible institutions that have produced so many great minds. Also genius works of literature such as Shakespeare, Oscar Wilde, C.S. Lewis, Joseph Conrad, J.R. Tolkien, George Orwell, John Stuart Mill, and the list goes on. How about that intangible wit, charm, and charisma that can only come from a Brit? Think Christopher Hitchens, Russell Brand, Douglas Murray, guys like this. They also have their own unique humour. Mr. Bean, Only Fools and Horses, Fawlty Towers, Monty Python, Little Britain. I mean, it's a very, very distinct, rich, and accomplished culture that British people happen to actually be pretty proud of. Pretty patriotic, you might say. And the immigrants that have come to the country come from many different places, but a lot of them are Arab Muslims. They have a different history, heritage, family lineage, value structure, and view on British culture and history. I mean, in my life, I've shown many different people from many different countries and walks of life the TV show Little Britain, which I believe is the funniest TV show ever made. And for some reason, nobody ever seems to laugh unless they're British.
Will you having cake?
If they have a ladies' cake, then yes, but only if we are ladies, aren't we?
Oh, yes, we are most definitely two of them, yes. Why don't you order for both of us? I'm off to powder my nose.
On the door.
Oh, yes.
And don't forget to sit down when you piss.
Anyways, I mean, a lot of these people have their own cultures, deeply rich, fascinating, interesting, and fantastic cultures, but undoubtedly very different. And of course, they're going to be less patriotic than a 10th generation Brit from Bournemouth. And it's not just because they're Muslims, it would be the same of anybody from a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Confucianist, a Jewish background. But this is just another example of this bizarre liberal ideology that people possess, where they believe that human beings are just blank slates, where they believe that as soon as anybody sets foot in England from Afghanistan, all of a sudden they'll be spending every Saturday morning at Wetherspoons getting a fryer, having high tea every day, getting your shirt off when it's more than 12 degrees in London and just sitting in a park for hours, or going to Malaga and getting in drunken fights. No, this is not the case, and it ever will be. People don't just abandon their cultures like that. I mean, maybe if it's a small amount of immigration, then over a few generations they can assimilate to the culture. But if it's what we've been seeing over the past few decades, forget about it. I mean, I was in London and Liverpool the whole month of May, and London especially is unrecognizable. They have very, very pronounced cultural enclaves, and they don't need to assimilate because the immigration has been so vast that they can basically just live however they were living back home, only with the Tesco's around the corner. And mark my words, and this shouldn't be surprising, or this isn't even a criticism, but there is no British patriotism in those places. It just doesn't exist. The places where you'll see British patriotism in London is like on the weekend when Tommy Robinson organised a march through London that saw hundreds and thousands of people turn out for this one march. People who are sick of seeing their country invaded and destroyed. It was a truly remarkable turnout, and this right here is why Nigel Farage is running. Because there is a mass populist political movement just waiting to happen and waiting to kick out the stale, dead Tories and Labour Party, and all it's going to require is for somebody to light a match and throw it on the gasoline. And who better to do it than Nigel Farage? And now on to the next bit, where the interviewer tries to produce some facts that actually end up backing up what Nigel Farage says. And pay close attention to the numbers here and how this interviewer is trying to frame these numbers and how Nigel Farage calls him out on it.
But let me start it talking to you about this way. Your flagship policy is zero immigration, net zero immigration, right? I talked to James Cleverly earlier on about the fact that net migration numbers are falling a bit.
No.
Well, I know. Let me finish as a fact.
No, I'm really sorry. Let's
they
get
are
this
falling
right.
a bit. They're falling
They
by
are
10%.
not falling, and here's why. Last year's legal migration figures were 606,000 until they were revised later.
I know, they've gone up.
745.
You haven't let me finish my question. You haven't let me finish my question.
But it was the wrong premise.
No, I want to put some facts to you.
I just did to you.
Inward migration last year, end of 22, was 1.2 million.
Yeah.
Actually,
Staggering.
it hasn't fallen in 2023, and in that sense, you're correct.
Oh, thank you.
But what's interesting is who the migrants are. Now, I want you to have a look at this.
Yep.
Indians up to 47%, Nigerians up 907%. Now, the reason that has happened is look at the bottom figure. EU figures down 193%.
How does 75,000 equate to 250,000, 141,000? So a tiny fraction.
Let me finish. Well, actually, if you go back further, the EU, the point is, European Union migrants left post-Brexit.
A few, a handful.
No, a lot more, actually. The point I really want to make is this. You are complaining about the people who you think don't share British values. You're identifying particular communities. And the point I want to make to you is that by the middle of the century, the white British proportion of population will be down below 2/3. That's the thing that I think you're worried about.
I didn't.
But this is.
I didn't say that.
Okay. The people who are.
Don't put words in my mouth.
Okay. The thing that you're worried about is your responsibility. You're the father of the policy that produced this.
No,
that made the EU EU migrants leave
Trevor,
and
it's the
and increase the number of non-EU migrants.
I've ever heard. Big load of cobblers I've ever heard in my life. What we did by leaving the European Union was to change a policy, which meant we discriminated against the rest of the world, often against talent, interestingly, in favour of an open door with the European Union. What Brexit did was give us back control of our own, and by the way, we're not even discussing Dover, get us back control of our legal migration policy. What Boris Johnson chose to do was to set the bars and the levels at the lowest possible level. He also allowed, for example, students to bring dependents. Whether you have to bring your mum with you to go to a British university is beyond me.
But you might have to bring your wife and children if you're a postgraduate.
Well, I'm sorry, we haven't got room. We've really got to start growing up on this. We haven't got room. We cannot go on. And it's unfair to put this population explosion, which you're very vividly showing on the screen, on the British
Because it's a fact. It's a fact.
Yeah, what's a fact?
It's a fact.
What is a fact?
It is the consequence of Brexit.
No, it's a consequence of government policy. You've got to.
Well, it only happened after Brexit.
Because Johnson, despite the fact people like me publicly warned, if you set the salary thresholds at this level, there was another massive opening up in 2021. This is Conservative policy. And of course, there's no opposition to it because Labour dare not even debate the issue. This has been done by. If you want mass immigration, vote Conservative. If you want mass immigration, vote Labour. If you want a proper debate about why this is the most impactful policy on everyone's life in this country, then we're the people to talk to in reform.
Are you essentially denying that you have anything to do with the change
100%
in immigration policy?
100. We said was...
Even though the point of your whole campaign was to put it under our control.
Yes.
Boris Johnson used it in whatever, you can argue about it, but it was
your argue. Look at the figures.
It was your responsibility that put it in Boris Johnson's hands. He then used it in a particular way. Now you might want.
No, I'm really sorry, but that is absolute rubbish. Getting back control of our own country means we can't blame the European Union.
Okay.
We can't blame anybody else. Those figures. This was done by a Conservative government, and they thought they'd get away with it.
OK, well, unfortunately, we haven't got all day to argue the toss on this, but I just want to ask you something about your own objectives in politics. You've decided you're not going to run yourself.
With regret. With regret. I had planned.
Why do you regret? What's wrong with it? Why didn't you run?
Because I had a plan.
Which is?
A 6-month plan to come back and campaign full-time for 6 months. The election was announced. It was a shock to me. It wrong-footed me. It's wrong-footed a lot of people, I'll be honest about that. And I took the view, I can't campaign around the country for the party or come on your show, do those things, if I've got to start from scratch, 6 weeks in one constituency. And that was the logic of what I chose.
In the end, either Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer is going to be in number 10. You've got to, at some point, choose one of them. In the last election...
Come off it!
And in the last election, you pulled your candidates against sitting Tories.
For a historic reason.
Which essentially meant the Tories got back in. Are you going to do something like that at the same time this year? In that case, is your aim to destroy the Conservative Party or to reform it?
The election's over. The election's over. By the way, isn't it the most boring start to a general election you've ever seen in your history?
I think you've come in to try to make it less boring this morning, haven't you?
I listened
But just deal with my question,
I listened to Sunak on the Today programme the other morning, and after 15, 17 minutes, I can't remember a single thing he said.
OK.
Sunak's all over the shop.
OK, but which one
Labour will win. Labour will win.
OK.
And there needs to be an opposition. And here's the problem. The Conservative Party will be in opposition, but they will not be the opposition. And that's the problem, and that's where reform comes in. It needs to win some seats, it will get millions of votes, and the current Conservative Party is not fit for purpose. It doesn't agree on anything. They'll actually hate each other more in opposition than they do in government, and I want to see the centre-right of British politics completely reshaped.
So interesting insight there, and you can just imagine Nigel Farage watching this election cycle so far and how stale and boring and monotonous it is and how pissed off people are about it and just the enormous need from the English people for a candidate who puts their needs first. And Farage just saying, screw it, I'm going for it. I mean, I, for one, as a passport-holding British citizen who lived there for years, got family there, am thrilled that he's running. And I'm genuinely tempted to make the trip over to London just to vote for him. I mean, Nigel Farage is a tremendously effective leader who has a vision and knows how to act on it. He led the Brexit movement, and you have to understand that for so many years, he got laughed out of every single room that he tried to present these ideas in. Just look at this old clip of him absolutely skewering the then Prime Minister of England, Tony Blair, in front of the bureaucrats at the European Parliament, and listen to their reaction. And just remember, this is all the way back in 2005, when Tony Blair was still in office, and when the thought of leaving the European Union was a total impossibility, and Nigel Farage was looked at as a nut job.
Prime Minister, 6 months ago, you came here, you impressed everybody with your reform agenda, even me. I said if you achieved your goals, I would support you. Economic reform was the cry. And within a couple of weeks, the Commission had proposed to scrap 68 new laws. I thought, crikey, perhaps Blair's going to do it. Perhaps he really is going to reform and change. But no, under your presidency, there have been 3,350 new legislative acts. Total failure on economic reform. On the CAP, you said you'd work to achieve a consensus for reform. Well, in a way you have, I suppose, because you've got 24 countries against you. No CAP reform until 2014. On the budget, you said there'd be no surrender of the UK rebate. Well, it seems to me that you've given away £7 billion of British taxpayers' money for nothing in return. Your only achievement is to open talks with Turkey, which is opposed by the vast majority of people in Europe and will lead to an even higher bill. Why should British taxpayers pay for new sewers in Budapest, for a new underground system in Warsaw, when our own public services are crumbling in London? Why should we pay? Why should we pay a penny piece into an organisation whose accounts have not been signed off by the auditors for the last 11 years in a row? This budget deal is game, set and match to President Chirac. No cheese-eating surrender monkey he. Unlike you, he stands up for the French national interest, not some bizarre notion of Europe, and he has outclassed and outplayed you at every turn. Your only real achievement is that Britain is now isolated, alienated. We are completely alone within the European Union, which is why it's been said before. Hang on a second. Everybody else gets an extra minute, Mr. President. I'm asking for 10 seconds. Thank you. Which is why, Prime Minister, I urge you. It's often been said that you wanted to be the permanent President of Europe. Please stay on for a further 6 months, 6 more months of the British presidency, and they'll kick us out. Thank you.
So, with hindsight in mind, it just goes to show how effective Nigel Farage can be, and how he has the ability to really speak for Brits, because he's not some elitist. He's a pretty normal bloke who can be found at the pub enjoying a beer and a cigarette, and he's actually in touch with what everyday people want. And everyday British people want their country back. They want a revitalisation of the British culture that I spoke about earlier. So, with that, guys, as per usual, you can find all my links below. And if you'd like to subscribe to the channel, if you're getting value from this, you can click here. And if you'd like to watch another one, right here. Till next time, I'm Jake. This is RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.